Good evening and welcome to the Monday, November 9th, 2020, 6 o'clock p.m. Board of Education special meeting at Bethel Local Schools in regards to our Facilities Committee. Call to order will be 6:01 p.m. Ms. Reese, can you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Rick Gilbert.
Here.
Justin Firks.
Present.
Brendan Hattery.
Present.
Chris Mills.
Here.
Danny Elam.
Here.
Lori Sebastian.
Here.
Julie Reese. Present. Caleb Runkle.
Here.
Okay, excellent. Item number 3, do we have any additions to the agenda? Take that as a no. Number 4, communications, updates, any meeting updates or announcements? Okay, no. Number 5, items for discussion, subcommittee reports. Letter A, number 1, has to do with construction manager at risk, CMR interview recommendations. So on Wednesday, November 4th, the Board of Education and also the Facilities Committee members interviewed 3 firms for our CMR. They were Peterson Construction, Shook Construction, and Conger Construction. We interviewed and had a question and answer session with each of those 3 firms for roughly an hour apiece. At the end of those 3 interviews, the board and the Facilities Committee were able to deliberate, discuss all 3 firms, present pros and deltas, and at the end, which will be on the agenda for this evening, there's a recommendation that will be made to the Board of Education by the Bethel Local Schools Facility Committee to retain Peterson Construction Company as the CMR for our upcoming K-5 and stadium build projects. Really excited to partner not only with Peterson Construction, but also Garmin Miller Architectural Firm for our upcoming projects. I thought overall the process went very well. Does anyone else have any other thoughts to share in regards to an update for the community on the CMR interviews or selection process? Okay. Letter A, number 2, is in regards to land and environmental surveys. I do notice that we have Laura Little on here from Garmin Miller, and then I think we also have a couple of representatives from CBC Engineering as well. At this time, I'll turn it over to Laura to kind of give an introduction to what's going to be talked about this evening.
Perfect. Thank you. Yep. So I also have with me Kathy Trejo and Kellen Mesher with Garmin Miller. And then also Carolyn Shepard is also attending with CBC Engineers, who will talk further about the environmental study. So just to give a project update and where we're at.
All right, are you ready for me?
No, sorry. I was
Okay.
PowerPoint looked like they were having some issues. So the environmental study is complete. We'll discuss that further in a little bit. Just to give an update, the site survey, Choice 1 Engineering is still working on that. The construction manager at risk, like Justin mentioned before, the interviews were held last week. That's just the grand project update. On the K-5 building, we did have the educational visioning meeting number 1. We have 2 more planned. And then the visioning group also toured 2 school buildings, New Bremen Elementary and then Greenville K-8. I think both of those went really well. They got to see a lot of neat things. And then at our next visioning meeting, we'll be able to discuss what those items were that they liked and didn't like, and we'll be able to go through the program and see how the program needs to be tweaked for your project. Here's some more pictures of the our first visioning session, and they were working on a couple different items, like what does the I think the one group on the right was talking about like a pod, that they'd like the idea of a pod that everybody could come to. So then next steps that we have, like I said, is doing that second visioning, and then during that second visioning, we'll complete the program of requirements. On the football stadium project, we did have a kickoff meeting at the end of October. From that meeting, the next steps that we have is to start creating some layouts. Of course, we're also, waiting on that survey to be able to like place that on the site too. Then also getting the environmental study is also going to help us be able to place those those buildings and where those might be. Any questions on the process so far before we get into the environmental report? Perfect. With that, then I will turn it over to Carolyn.
All right, thank you. So I am the wetland scientist with CBC Engineers, and I, along with Ruthie Herman, who is our endangered species sort of expert here, we completed an ecological survey. So the first thing we did is we looked at endangered species and threatened species. That includes plants and animals like the Indiana bat, and there are several endangered mussels in Ohio. So we contacted the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we got lists of potential endangered species that are located in this property map. So this is the delineation map, which I'll get to in a second. But for the threatened and endangered species, we basically only found an issue or a potential issue with the Indiana bat. And I do have a picture, a map of the potential habitat for the Indiana bat. I don't know if you can pull that up. It's a
Brennan,
little bit further
can you
down.
go down a couple? Yep, keep going.
I think one or two more. Oh, that's it. All right. So what we looked for is typical bat habitat is bark with trees with exfoliating bark with shaggy bark. Dead and dying trees are habitat. And so what I went through and I did is I marked all of the forested area, because according to the ODNR, all forested area is technically potential bat habitat. It may not be, but that is just sort of that's just the status that they've gone with. And in the red, I have circled again the things that I actually did find bat habitat in, and that was those dead and dying trees and trees with exfoliating shaggy bark. So that's in that red area. And that will probably require just extra coordination with the ODNR or building during the season when bats are not roosting in those trees, which is about November to April. That's what the ODNR typically suggests. And I did look for endangered plant species. I did not find any during my study. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are none there, but I did not find anything of concern on my site walk. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I do real quick. So as long as we stay out of that red area for the forested habitat area, if we have no plans of doing any building in that area, is there any concern?
I would say you're still, depending on how many acres of forested area you're taking out, even if it's in the green, you're probably going to want to contact the ODNR, because very likely they'll say you can build as long as the bats aren't actively roosting. The issue is if you go ahead and build, you cut down trees, and then the ODNR finds out about it, hears about it, or they find that there could have been bats there, then that causes a whole world of trouble. So typically what we suggest is to build or do your construction from November to around April around then. Although we're having such a warm November, things are kind of weird. But typically I would suggest November to April. And if you're going to take out a significant portion of the acreage, although it it was probably only around 10 acres of that outside of what's highlighted in red. That's not that big of an area as far as the ODNR is concerned. But I would still maybe reach out to them and just say that we want to cut down these trees and do this construction. If we do it during this time period, is that okay? And I would bet that they would be okay with it as long as you contact them and don't do it in the middle of summer when bats would be actively roosting there. Anything else?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, so that was basically the endangered species animals wise. And then I did look for plants. I didn't find anything. Another thing you might have heard that we look out for in Ohio would be mussels. There's a bunch of endangered mussels in Ohio, but I did not find any streams or wetlands that would house any mussels or salamanders, so we don't have to worry about that. Those are not there. So the next part of the ecological survey was the wetland and stream delineation, which I did following the 1987 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual. And so I looked for anything that would be considered a wetland by the U.S. Army Corps, which that means that it has hydrophytic vegetation, means that it has the geology to hold water, and then it also has hydric soils. And I found 2 wetlands. So, and I do have a map of that as well.
Brennan,
It'll be
can
higher
you
up.
scroll up?
So this is the National Wetland Inventory Map. And what I found when I was actually boots on the ground there and I was looking at the soils and the vegetation, I found less than that. And the National Wetland Inventory Map can be wrong. It's not always accurate. It's usually based off of aerial imagery, so it's not super accurate. It can be, but you don't go totally based off that. So if you go up one more. Oh, another one. One more up, I think. Yeah, there it is. So this is what I found to be on the site. You'll see I have Wetland A and Wetland D. Wetland A, I believe, is new, probably from when they constructed that field. It's a pretty small Category 1 wetland. It's mostly full of cattails, which are considered an invasive plant, so it's not a very high quality wetland, you could say. We have Category 1, 2, and 3 wetlands in Ohio, and so both wetlands on the property are Category 1, meaning that they are of lower quality. And then I also found what I denoted here as channels. I have 3 channels. And the way that streams are classified in Ohio, you have perennial and then intermittent and then ephemeral. Perennial being that it has water flowing all year long. Intermittent, it might have water flowing in the spring or during really wet times. And ephemeral is dry pretty much throughout the year. I took these a step further and called them a linear erosional feature because they did not have well-defined bed and banks. I didn't feel comfortable calling them a stream, which would have been under the jurisdiction of the Corps or the Ohio EPA. So right now, as I've classified them, those wouldn't be under the jurisdiction. You could build on those. The EPA wouldn't have a say over that. But I just also want to point out with this delineation, it was not ever sent to the Corps. We agreed upon that. So it wasn't sent to the Corps, which means that this is my best professional opinion. However, it's not a legally binding document with the Corps. So the Corps has not technically approved it or signed this and saying that it has been looked over by the Corps. This is my professional opinion. And in the past, when I have done something like this and then submitted it to the Corps, I have very little changes, if any. So you can feel confident that this map is generally what the Corps, the U.S. Army Corps, would agree with. But I just want to point out that this is a preliminary delineation. It has not been approved by any government agency. Any questions on that? The agencies can get a little confusing.
Caroline, this is Lori Sebastian. Do we have to get permission from the Corps?
So the wetlands, you would need to get permission from the Corps if you were to remove those. However, I believe that those are both isolated wetlands, so it would ultimately come under the jurisdiction of the Ohio EPA. And those are very low quality wetlands. Wetland A is 0.1 acres. So to take that out would honestly be relatively easy mitigation. It would probably be a 1 to 1.5 ratio to mitigate for it, which just means that you would have to mitigate for 1.15 acres, and you have to, so to get a mitigation credit with the EPA, you typically have to pay, and it's per acre, but for 0.15 acres, it wouldn't be terrible. Yeah, so you would be dealing with the EPA there. So you don't have to worry about the erosional features, which I have not called a stream because I don't think they are one. No defined bed and bank. But that wetland A, I do think you would need to go through a regulatory agency. And of course, I don't know the site plans. Based on what I knew, I thought that wetland A would be the bigger issue than wetland D. But both of them could be submitted to the Corps and then ultimately turned over to the Ohio EPA, if need be.
Caroline, it's awfully close to the retention pond that was made, correct?
Sorry, I had trouble hearing that. My
Oh,
speakers are being funny.
I'm sorry. Wetland A is awfully close to the retention pond that was constructed for the new high school. Is that correct? Did that have anything to do with that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure why I can't hear you, but
he's asking if it's close to the existing retention pond and if maybe that had an effect on it.
Right.
It did look like it was like purposefully draining towards that area, which I think was done on purpose when that addition was made and the parking lots were made. I'm not sure what would be considered the detention pond there. It just didn't seem well defined. Would the detention pond be to the right of this screen grab of this map? And it has like the riprap bottom?
That's correct. It would be to
Okay.
It's north of the building.
Yeah, so it does that. It's not totally connected to that. I tested the soils pretty much from where I have denoted wetland A all the way over to that detention area that you're talking about. And it really dries out. So wetland A is pretty small. And that detention area would not be a wetland because it doesn't have hydric soils.
Right.
And had very limited vegetation. And to be considered a wetland, it has to have all three. It has to have the soil, the geography, and the plants. And so that's why I didn't count that, and that's why it stops where it is.
Caroline, I have a question actually. This is Kathy from Garmin Miller. So if we, as we move forward with our concepts, and if we find that we feel we're going to need to contact Army Corps or EPA or someone else, is that a service that the school could entertain working with CBC?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And with what I've already submitted, I have almost all of that paperwork done actually, because you wanted all the official forms. So that's what I went ahead and did. And that wraps up everything that I had to talk about for the ecological study, if no one else has any questions.
So even though everything on your forms just about was no, it's still a category 1. Wetland A still is.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure why I'm having so much trouble hearing you. Kathy, could you help me out
Yeah.
again?
Yes, wetland A and wetland D are category 1. That's what he's asking.
Yes, they are.
But even though that means they're low quality, they still need to be dealt with the EPA.
Yes, and I could see a situation with the EPA, with the Ohio EPA, with wetland A, where since it was recently created, and it is a category 1, it's rather small, that we could call that a negligible impact and try and see if we can get around mitigating for it and jumping through all those hoops. That's something that I would want to contact the Ohio EPA on before I gave a definite answer.
Do you have any guesses, just even a wild range of what that cost would be, the mitigation cost for 0.15
Yeah.
acres?
Yes. So to mitigate, I was just working on a project, where the average cost per acre was around 40,000. So this is 0.15 maximum, but that would end up being around $6,000. Again, that's a rough number, and the prices can actually fluctuate quite a bit with mitigation because mitigation banks, as they're called, get more credits, lose more credits. So the demand goes up and the price can go up, but you're looking, I would probably guess between $5,000 to $10,000 if you had to mitigate. But again, I do think there's an avenue that we could try and take with the Ohio EPA to say that it's negligible impacts and you might not have to. So I would have to present an argument to them on why it's negligible.
So I did send the full report to Justin today from CBC. It included a bunch more maps and pictures, which I had in here in this presentation, just in case somebody asked a question, that those pictures would be there. Not that we necessarily had to cover them all. But if you guys have any questions when you do read the report, feel free to reach out and we can try to get those answered as well.
All right, anything else for me?
I have one more question.
Okay.
What is involved with mitigation if we would have to do that?
So mitigation, there's 3 options, and that it begins with mitigation using a mitigation bank, which means that places like there's the Great Miami Mitigation Bank. They preserve or create wetlands and then allow people like yourselves to buy credits for those wetlands. You try to keep it within the same watershed. So you're paying for what they have restored, basically, or what they have created. The second option is that same thing, but outside of the watershed. The Corps does not like that as much, but sometimes it has to happen. There are 4 options. So the third would be an in lieu fee program, which means that no one in the area has any mitigation credits available. There's just none. And so you would do an in lieu fee program where you would put money into this bank, into this organization that has promises to build wetlands in the future. So that's why it's an in lieu fee. And then the last option, which the Corps doesn't particularly like, but it can happen, is permittee responsible mitigation. So you could say, we need to take out wetland A, but while we're building what we're building, when we do our plans, we can create a wetland double the size on the other side of the property, and then that can count towards your mitigation. With that last option, then you are responsible for keeping up with the mitigation, and they'll have up to a 10-year plan. So every year and then every 2 years, they will come out and they'll need a survey done to make sure that you're keeping up with the quality of the wetland.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for your time this evening, Carolyn. We appreciate your efforts with CBC Engineering. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to talk to you all. I hope I answered all your questions.
Well, I'm sure as we get an opportunity to go through that report, if we have any more, we'll get in touch with you and obviously use Garmin Miller as our channels of communication.
Okay. All
Thank you.
right, no problem.
All right, thank you.
Well, I'm gonna have to sign off here unless if anyone has any last minute questions.
Hey, this is Todd. Just one quick question. I know we were talking mainly about wetland A. What, just out of curiosity, wetland D, what size is that?
That one is 0.91 acres total.
Okay.
Just under an acre.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Julie. I have a quick question too. You said you could go to the Corps, the EPA, or the appropriate government organization and maybe get that wetland A down to something that's negligible. What would that cost us?
Well, that you would not have to pay for mitigation. So it would be the services to go through CBC to get that information to the Corps, and then the Corps. So to start this, you do a jurisdictional determination, and that just means I send something to the Corps, and I tell them, hey, I don't think this is under your jurisdiction. I think it's the Ohio EPA, and they say, I agree, or they don't agree. I think they will. This all looks very isolated. And then I would go through whichever organization takes jurisdiction. I believe would be the Ohio EPA. And then from there, so let's say it was the Corps. There are nationwide permits that you can go through. And if you impact less than 0.1 acres of wetlands, which would be all of wetland A, you could take out, and 300 linear feet of streams, which doesn't impact you here, but that's the threshold, then you can do that without any mitigation. And so I'd have to talk with the Ohio EPA and see how they would want to handle that and if they would follow the nationwide permit, or if I could just go through them and say that it is negligible. But it can be a case-by-case basis because the Clean Water Act can be a little bit vague. I would want to get a case agent from the Ohio EPA assigned to this. That way I can speak with them and see how they would classify it.
Okay, I got you. So my question, I guess, was if it's going to cost us $5,000 to $10,000 to mitigate it, what would it cost us to hire you to try to get it declared as negligible?
Gosh, I would really have to put a quote together to put a price on our services. However, to figure out the mitigation from the Corps, you're also going to want an agent. Doesn't have to be CBC, obviously, but you're going to want an agent who's familiar with the Corps and the districts.
I see.
So you're really looking at the same amount of work. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to say, hey, I think this is negligible. The difference is whether or not they accept that argument. And then we could avoid mitigation. But either way, we still have to submit all of our documents to these agencies.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, thank you again, Caroline. I hope you have a good evening.
Yeah, of course. You too. Thank you.
Laura, one of the items on here from the agenda from the Facilities Committee was just a quick, update or kind of what your thoughts are timeline-wise as far as the traffic pattern survey and when you think that might take place.
So to do that, we need to know exactly where we're going to be exiting. So to do that, we really need a site plan. So we probably aren't going to be looking at that until possibly December, January. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy.
Yeah, they for their study, they're going to want all the counts and they're going to want to know what to study. And so we definitely need a concept first.
We're also going to need the student count.
Yes.
which I know that's been discussed that, is it really 873 or is it another number? That is a number they are going to need to know.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions in regards to the traffic pattern survey? Okay, next item on the agenda was number 4, Stadium Core Team Meeting Summary. Those minutes were, I think, emailed out to all of the facility committee members and also the Board of Education members, just to kind of give a quick rundown of that stadium kickoff meeting. Take you through step by step as far as what was talked about. We had a number of folks that were in attendance from not only the board, but also Garmin Miller, maintenance and grounds, athletic director, treasurer, superintendent, et cetera. And so some of the meeting notes that were discussed were looked at the project cost of the total completion of the stadium, which was set for $3.5 million. A few of the items that we discussed during the visioning process or discussion of the project was, overall arching goals were to create a facility where student athletes and community could call home, because we know that the school is the center or the hub of the community, as there is no town. We talked about the possibility down the road of bringing baseball back on campus with facilities where multiple events could take place at one time. We also want to create facilities where it's a place of pride. Some of the discussion during that meeting was we felt like our athletic facilities currently are below standard, and we want to create an environment where people want to come to, and it's also a dedicated place where other people feel like they're accommodated. One of the goals that we felt like we wanted to meet with this project was to meet promises or discussions that were had during previous building projects, and then also create a hospitable environment where visitors feel welcome and they want to visit. In regard to some of the programming for the football stadium, we were taking a look at a north-south orientation where the home side will face the east so that the home side has the sun at their backs. We've also talked about the possibility of having a 9-lane track, which would allow the district to potentially host a regional site with a 9-lane track. Garmin Miller recommended, as far as lighting, to have 4 poles. And then we're also looking at different types of scoreboards, different types of scoreboard options that are out there. In regards to track, we want to ensure that we have 2 long jump pits, 2 high jump pits, shot put area, and then also a disc area. And so we were also taking a look at layout as far as having some sort of a gate area between the shot put and disc area and also the stadium. So those were kind of some of the things we looked at. We also indicated that we wanted to have a pole vault pit as well to be able to host events. As far as bleacher capacity, some of the discussions that took place were to have a stadium that seats roughly 2,000 visitors in seating, which is nice about football is that you can also have standing room capacity around the fences as well. So that'd be roughly 1,500 folks on the home side, around 500 capacity on the visitors with enclosed decks and risers. Just for, I guess, knowledge sake, our current seating is right around 856. So we'd be doubling it plus some. We also talked about the importance we felt of keeping the band within the student section. And we currently have around 40 to 50 band members. It would be a framed bleacher design so that nothing would be located underneath it. We would also have ADA ramps on both sides and ADA seating as well. Some of the things that we mentioned as far as seating is having what's considered metro seating or reserve seats, which would seat around 200 to 250 people for like a season ticket type option that we would also be able to incorporate within those seats our school logo or design. And then the last row adjacent to the press box would be a bench seat. As far as the press box, we're looking at having accessibility from the bleachers. We would need to keep it less than 500 square feet so that an elevator or chairlift is not required. There'd be 3 sections within the press box for the home side, which would be coaching staff, the visiting side, coaching staff, and then a middle section for media. We would also like to look at operable windows or fixed slanted windows so that they could be opened up. We would like to have a roof deck, which would be a flat surface on top where either coaches or video film could be on top. And we may want a second level raised in the back of the main level to allow the press to sit up a little bit higher than the people in the front row. We would obviously provide heating and cooling, make sure we have the appropriate technology, sound system speakers, all that kind of stuff. As far as building, some of the things that we talked about were ticket booths. We looked at the possibility of having one main gate area with separate multiple windows for home and visitor gates. In addition, we were looking at having concessions and restrooms with 2 overhead doors with 2 serving lines at each opening. I know one of the things that Garmin-Miller has talked about, they want to get in touch with, or get me to have me get in touch with the booster group to see what kind of specific equipment they would want in those concession stand areas. That's going to make a huge difference, I think, with design as well. Toilet facilities per code, we need to have 19 women toilets, 10 men toilets and urinals. We would also need to have 7 men and women on visitor side as well, and then possibly considered 1 building if we wanted to look at that. As far as a training room, 2 to 3 tables, a room for a whirlpool, ice machine, washer dryer connections for uniforms, locker room areas for home football. We'd be looking at around 75 lockers for football, 50 for visitors for our home side. We'd also be able to accommodate right around 30 male soccer players if the budget will allow, and also 30 female soccer players if the budget will allow. And then obviously toilet and shower facilities. Lockers would be 18 by 18. We would also include a referee room to allow them to have a place to change, with 6 lockers and an office space as well for coaches. Some of the storage room, we would need to make sure we have a storage room area for all football and track related equipment. That space would need to be air conditioned as well for the storage of that equipment so that we maintain it in a good, suitable fashion. We talked about the potential of having like a plaza area as we walk up to the stadium with flagpoles, or maybe some sort of a veterans memorial or something similar to that. It could be a location to gather before games. We talked about color schemes. Green and white, Kelly green and white are our official colors. Black and gold are secondary colors. As far as the track surface, we looked at potentially having a black colored track surface. We've talked about the potential of having naming rights to the stadium and the bleachers, the press box, etc. The athletic department working with the athletic booster committee, and also various committee members, board members, etc. They're putting together a potential field turf subcommittee that's taking a look at the potential to raising money to have field turf. And then obviously looking at separate parking for game workers. Other items that we discussed during the meeting had to do with locations for potentially baseball and softball in the future. Could the press box have dual usage? It would be nice to be able to have that to share across the board. Dual usage for parking in regards to the school and athletics sharing the same. Infrastructure being built to have a timing system for track that would allow us to host league meets and also tournaments. The idea would be to hopefully have a rendering in January for fundraising efforts for turf, if that's the direction that the field turf subcommittee wants to go in. A staging area for bands for competitions to be able to host, which would allow easy entrance and exit. A couple of things that we talked about also in regards to that would be within our master facilities plan down the road would to be considered some sort of a athletic / community center as well. That would have showers, community room, shelter, be able to hold monthly township meetings, multiple sports surfaces, could be used for a lot of different things. So some action items for Garmin-Miller. They're going to provide some costs in regards to a separate press box and restrooms versus provided costs. They're also going to start conceptual drawings. One of the items that I just talked about as well is, Todd, you're going to want to get with Laura in regards to the type of equipment that you're going to need concession-wise for in the concession stand area. And that is a lengthy rundown of our stadium core meeting. Laura, did I forget anything at all? I kind of went through list by list, but
I think that's it.
okay. Do any of the facility committee members or board members have any questions in regards to that kickoff meeting?
Yeah, this is Julie. That was a great summary. Thank you very much. I just really have one question. So when you talk about the restrooms, was there any discussion on having some family style or unisex bathrooms? Those kind of seem to be the trends of the day, if you will.
We did not specifically discuss that, but yes, that would be a great idea to have something like that.
Okay, you can put it on your agenda for next time, I guess. Thank you.
This is Lori. I just wanted to thank everyone for their input. I think it's a very well thought out plan. I was really impressed with the 9-lane track because I think that gives us so many options moving forward to host events, if funds permit, of course. I did want to check on the seating capacity. Our stadium has been in existence really since we've been a 900 student school. And when it's completed, it will certainly be capable of holding the necessary students and fans. I'm wondering if we grow, though, what our options are if we have other options with seating.
Laura, would options include also bringing in additional portable bleachers and end zones, or is there anything else we could do with the fixed stadium seating to be able to add additional seating on in the future?
Well, we could always look at how an additional section could be added on. And just take a look at that with future planning, where that could possibly be, and if that modifies the bleachers at any to do that.
Would that be a question for Brian that I could get a hold of him, or would?
When we start to look at the layout, we'll just start having those discussions. That's mostly with the bleacher manufacturers when we start to get layouts from them. How we could potentially add on. It'll be something that we'll look at.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Justin, this is Jacob. I know I'm ahead of schedule here from the community input, but specifically on this topic, there's possibly another option on the north-south end of the field that if we did the grass, elevated grass, area where you could sit, instead of having bleachers, you could have a designated area that's raised. I don't know if you tracking kind of what I'm saying is it's like a stair step and it's just grass, but concrete, and you could sit there, you can put a blanket out and it would exceed capacity as long as it was able to work around those other athletic pieces like pole vault, jump, long jump, things like that. Just thought I'd throw that out there just as a note.
Yep, we can look at that.
Does anyone else have any additional questions or suggestions for the athletic stadium group?
This is Julie again. Sorry, I do have one other question since a couple times I've heard the phrase money permitting, funding permitted. The 3.5 million, that was the original number, right? That we had intended on spending on this.
That is correct.
Okay. So everything else will be raised through fundraising or some other means.
Yes, we were very clear that if field turf was an option that the athletic department, boosters, and community wanted to pursue, that would be outside of the $3.5 million towards the stadium.
Okay,
so
thank you.
With our certificates of participation, it's a $28.5 million project, 25 towards the elementary school, 3.5 towards the stadium. Is that correct, Brennan?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or suggestions or comments in regards to athletic stadium? Okay, moving on to letter B, we have a number of items on here for discussion. Number one is in regards to storm shelter. Julie, do you have any comments in regards to storm shelter or any other group members?
Well, these are just here. We don't have to discuss them all. These are just the things that had come up in the past. I think the full-size gym felt that it could be included before, but that wasn't entirely clear. And the storm shelter, of course, has come up a couple times since then on whether we should go ahead with it, even though we're not required. I think just because of the concern that, you know, we're kind of out in the middle of the country and there is no place to go if there is a big storm. So, you know, what would it take to do that, and how does that affect the funding, et cetera? And then the roof options was, I think people had kind of wanted a slanted roof, if it was possible, something that was angled. Again, I know that's not part of the money, or may not be. And then the synthetic turf versus the natural grass, which I think the question came up this week on what the pros and cons are of one versus the other, especially for the players, like safety wise and injury wise. Did I describe that okay, Lori?
I think so. Really the only one I had wanted to discuss with the team was the storm shelter, and maybe Laura can comment. How quickly do we need to make that decision, Laura?
Sorry, trying to find the mute button. For the storm shelter, we don't necessarily need that right away. We could probably wait until January. Get the CMR on board, start to be able to talk about what those potential costs might be for a storm shelter versus not, because I'm sure you're going to ask. I don't have those costs, but I know we do have those costs on other projects that I would be able to go back and pull. And then also with the CMR, be able to have those discussions with them to get that information for you so you can make a decision on that.
Thank you.
This is Caleb. When we were looking at the alternative structures for possible school additions earlier this year or last year, we'd looked at possibly getting or installing a dome structure, and some of that would have potentially received funding for that, since it would have been considered a storm shelter. Is there anything like that available if we go with the traditional brick and mortar storm shelter?
You're saying like a pre-manufactured storm shelter?
No, just is there any other funding options, I guess, if we went with the storm shelter versus non-storm shelter?
Oh, I have no idea.
So Caleb, this is Julie, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the way I understand it is the storm shelter money is included in the estimate that we have, the 25 million. But if we choose not to do it, then we can take that money and put it elsewhere. Is that correct, Brennan, Justin?
That is correct.
So the question to us is, do we want to spend the money on the storm shelter, or do we want to apply that money elsewhere to something that may have a higher priority? We can put this on the December. We got about 10 minutes left. We could put this on the December agenda if we don't need it right away. The storm shelter, the gym, and the roof options.
Well, Julie, I don't think we can have a discussion until we have cost information. I mean, truly. So whenever Laura thinks the construction manager and Garmin Miller, our architect, can have that information is when we should discuss it, in my opinion.
Agree. I mean, I can just push it to the agenda. If we don't discuss it, then we can just push it until we have the numbers.
As far as the roof options, we'll be looking at the building design, the exterior elevations, what that what that looks like. For this project in your budget, I believe you'd be better off with a flat roof. If you're trying to pop it up and be able to see like the roofing material, that is going to start to impact some of the other things that you may want on the project. But if the roof having that slope is really, really important to you, then maybe that's something that we do look at. So I guess, I don't know what exactly, if you have a question for me on roof options, or if you guys have a feel for one way or another, I guess. Are you happy with the flat roof that you currently have on the middle school, high school? Is that a problem?
I think, Laura, the issue historically has been flat roofs are more prone to leak and cause damage inside, whereas the sloped roofs hopefully drain. And so it's maybe as much perception as actuality, but we really couldn't put sloped roof on the new addition with it being attached to the elementary. I think it would have looked a little bit odd, but being a freestanding building, we have the ability to at least look at that option. And maybe Todd or one of the other facility members would have comments who are more familiar with construction, but I can tell you historically, that was the opinion.
And some things that we've done on other projects is we still have a slope to the roof. Maybe it's not the slope that you would have for a flat roof, like at a quarter 12, a half 12, something like that. But maybe you do a 112 that's able to shed that water a little better. But you're still not going to see like a high profile roof with it being a 112.
I don't think the profile
we can
was
look at.
part of the question, but it was all about, like Lori said, about flat roofs leaking and so forth. I had experience in my room with that. And the how often you have to maintain the roof and re-roof and so forth. The maintenance costs as opposed to the one-time costs. Right, Lori?
Correct.
Was the flat roof versus the sloped roof also, didn't a sloped roof have to be locally funded as opposed to co-fundable?
It was in on the survey. It was one of the items in the survey. So I think.
Okay.
But I believe that's correct. If you were going to do this, what's the term I want to use? The sloped roof that has the metal, that'd be an LFI.
Standing.
Okay, so but having a sloped roof doesn't mean it has to be a metal roof. But yes, I would agree. You do not currently have the budget for a metal roof.
Hey, this is Todd. And then something I'm thinking about, your mechanicals, does that change a little bit with having a sloped roof as far as, rooftop units and that type of stuff? I know like when we were at Greenville, their air handlers and stuff were inside as opposed to rooftop packages being on top of a flat roof. Is that right?
Well, and if you have the space for it outside, that doesn't necessarily have to be roof mounted. Those are all things that we need to look at.
Okay.
Okay, so for this, for at least the first three items, we'll just push it to the next agenda.
What's the question on the full-size gym? Sorry, I'm not aware of that one.
The topic that was brought up previously before we engaged in a contract with you folks when we were going through master facilities planning was the idea of having our elementary gymnasium to be floor space wise the size of our current middle school gym so that we could host practices and those kind of things in it. Maybe not bleacher capacity, but the size of the floor.
Okay. So currently under the OFCC program, you don't have that square footage for that. So anything that you would add to the square footage is going to be completely locally funded and will not be co-funded from OFCC. So it would be nice to have an answer on that if you intend to add additional dollars to the project to do that or not soon.
I thought we were looking at doing that right after the survey was done, correct?
So that survey was done with our previous firm, so we would need to have additional conversations with Garmin Miller to find out what that additional cost is going to be and if the district's willing to spend that dollars.
I think their opinion was that it would fit in the money with the stadium. That's the way I understood it.
In the $3.5 million?
Yes.
Okay, the issue that we're going to have though is you're relying on conversations with a totally different company.
I agree. I'm just saying, I was just refreshing memory there was that I think that was their thought.
I don't remember it that way.
Something like that could be done, but then you're taking away the budget from the stadium project,
Correct.
which we talked about as being $3.5 million.
Laura, can you get us approximate costs from what's currently budgeted for the elementary, the K-5 building gym, and what a full-size gym would cost and what we're looking at? So we're actually talking about real numbers. And if you don't know that now, it can wait till next meeting.
I do not have those numbers, but I can get those together for you.
Okay, so I'll leave those on the discussion list for next time. We have 3 minutes.
Number 4 is the one that you had as well, Julie.
Yeah, that came up because somebody had asked the question about the pros and cons of that, and you know how it affects the players and injuries. And I don't know. I just want to have some discussion about it. Maybe you're doing that in the other meetings.
That's information I'll have to get to you. I don't have any of that information.
Okay, I'll put it on the list for next time.
Okay, letter C, next steps. We will have a recommendation made this evening to the Board of Education at our 7 o'clock meeting to retain Peterson's Construction Company as our CMR for our upcoming K-5 and also stadium build projects. Brennan, do we have any hearing of the public?
I do not have any.
Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for, does anyone have the date in front of them?
December 7th?
Okay, December 7th, 2020 at 6 o'clock p.m. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Just a minute. Is it the second Monday, Julie? The second Monday is the 14th,
Okay.
isn't it? Or am I off?
I don't know. That's why I was asking that as a question. So there's going to be 2 weeks between the meetings then?
Work session would be on December 1st and the regular meeting on December 7th. That's the first. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm wrong.
It's the 14th.
That's right. The 14th. Yep. It'll be 2 weeks in between.
Okay.
14th.
Okay, so the next meeting will be December 14th, 2020. Facilities Committee will meet at 6 o'clock, followed by the board meeting at 7 p.m. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Is that Brennan?
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Caleb.
Caleb? All right. Ms. Reese, can you please call the roll?
That was Mr. Gilbert.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, Rick Gilbert,
Yes.
Justin Firks,
Yes.
Brennan Hattery,
Yes.
Chris Mills,
Yes.
Danny Elam,
Yes.
Lori Sebastian,
Yes.
Julie Reese, yes. Caleb Runkle.
Yes.
Okay, meeting is adjourned at 7 p.m.